Well, I'm losing my voice. I'm not sure what bug I caught. This might make for rough listening, but I figure rough listening is better than no listening, so thanks for bearing with me. And plus, I want to talk about this story on healthcare for transgender youth that aired on Sunday night's episode of 60 Minutes. The story is by Leslie Stahl. Last I listened to a piece from her, she was watching Hitler videos with Susan WikiWiki and begging Susan for more YouTube censorship, but this piece is much better. The story is framed with Arkansas becoming the first state to outlaw gender transition services for minors. Then we hear from a psychologist critical of that law who provides transgender services to youth in San Francisco and is himself transgender. And then we hear from a handful of young people who transitioned and have now detransitioned because of the negative effects of that decision and the medical intervention. In other words, it's a balanced piece. Here's a controversy, here's side A, here's side B, you decide. And for those young adults who transitioned and then came to regret it, it's not regret like, I ate a whole pizza and a pint of ice cream and I won't do that again. It's regret like I mutilated myself and there's nothing I can do to fix that. And the story doesn't hide those details.
I started to have a really disturbing sense that like a part of my body was missing, almost a ghost limb feeling about being like, there's something that should be there. And the feeling really surprised me, but it was really hard to deny.
From taking hormones to getting his testicles removed, he says in just 3 months.
It kind of felt like, how am I ever gonna feel normal again like other guys now?
In all the constant talk of courage and bravery on this topic, that, to me, is genuine courage. To put yourself under public scrutiny for something you're proud of is one thing. To put yourself under public scrutiny for something that you regret, something for which you're ashamed, that's something more difficult. It's not self-promotional, but that's exactly why it's admirable. These detransitioners aren't parading around saying, look at me, I'm so great. They're sitting down seriously and saying, look at me, I was rushed and I walked too casually into a foolish decision. Do not take the path that I did lightly.
How many of you feel that you were blindly affirmed?
I didn't get enough pushback on transitioning. I went for 2 appointments, and after the second one, I had like my letter to go get on cross-sex hormones.
2 visits? That's it?
But for all that usual talk of bravery, for all that usual talk of believing lived experiences, these detransitioners get none of that. Instead, they get only scorn from the activists otherwise telling you these perspectives deserve respect. This 60 Minutes piece is explicitly aware that they're going to be in trouble with the alphabet mafia just for talking about this.
LGBTQ advocacy groups like GLAAD and the Human Rights Campaign are worried that highlighting the stories of detransitioners could make things worse.
And Leslie isn't just right broadly, she's right about the specific organization. Just 2 hours after airtime, GLAAD already had a Twitter thread rolling about how angry they are that 60 Minutes allowed these detransitioners to speak, calling their views fear-mongering about trans youth. GLAAD, if you're unaware, is an organization devoted to fighting defamation of gay and trans people in media. As though anything said in this piece was defamatory. Not one person featured in the story voicing caution about transitioning minors, from the detransitioners themselves to the gender psychologist who's skeptical about the direction of the field. Not one of them has anything defamatory to say about somebody else. They're discussing their own experience with the issue, experience GLAAD otherwise insists we are to trust and to listen to and not to diminish, unless GLAAD disagrees, and then your experience is trash and it should be discarded accordingly, and you should be personally discredited as a fearmonger and worse. GLAAD rips everyone involved in the piece, including the detransitioners themselves, firstly, for supposedly wrongly implying that trans YouTubers and online personalities brainwash kids into gender transitions. Aren't we past arguing that media can turn people gay or trans, GLAAD asks? Well, it's odd for an organization devoted to fighting harmful media influence to suddenly say that media has no other harmful influence. But regardless, these detransitioners didn't imply anything. They outright say, yes, online personalities influenced our decision-making.
All 4 tell us they learned about transitioning on the internet, where there are transformation videos on YouTube, trans influencers, and forums.
And we can debate how representative that experience is, but it's not some made-up lie. It's not an unsubstantiated inference. That is what happened to them. GLAAD says one of the detransitioners is the president of an advocacy organization, and 60 Minutes' failure to mention that detail is poor journalism. But why? The activism wasn't the story. The experience with detransitioning was. And besides, 60 Minutes gave plenty of time to activists on the other side. 60 Minutes gave both the first and the last word in the piece to that transgender psychologist in San Francisco who is also an activist. But 60 Minutes didn't disclose his activism either. 60 Minutes also gave time to the president of the Human Rights Campaign. The activism wasn't cloaked in this story. It was present on all sides. GLAAD doesn't have a problem with the activists they agree with, only with the activists they don't. And the same goes for doctors. GLAAD rips the skeptical psychologist in the piece implicitly as not an actual medical authority, even though she was the first psychologist at the first gender clinic in the country, helping establish that department in 2007.
Laura Edwards-leeper was the first psychologist at the first major youth gender clinic in the U.S. at Boston Children's Hospital.
It greatly concerns me where the field has been going. I feel like what is happening is unethical and irresponsible.
And you can dispute her opinion all you like, but that disagreement doesn't mean that she's not an actual medical authority. In what other context would you say this? If you have to make an important medical decision, you'll often seek a second opinion. And where you find disagreement, it doesn't mean that one doctor is a medical authority and the other isn't. It means that every decision has complexities and nuance to consider. It means that every decision has both benefits and costs to think about. It means that what's right for one person isn't necessarily right for another. And that basic point of caution is the opinion of every voice of skepticism featured in this piece. It's not anti-trans. It's not anti-transition. It's not even anti-transition for kids. It's just, hey, maybe let's slow down a minute and consider all the factors here. And yet GLAAD still smears them all as dog whistling anti-trans messaging, dog whistling the talking points of the Arkansas legislature. Well, one, they didn't. Everybody featured in this piece is in favor of the availability of gender transition services, even for minors, just maybe with a little more caution. The detransitioner activist organization says they oppose bans like the one in Arkansas. They just want a little more safeguards in the process. But two, as though the case for banning that intervention with kids has no merit. If this 60 Minutes piece actually was unfair in ignoring a perspective, it's the perspective of the Arkansas legislators and their constituents. Nobody in favor of that bill got any time in this story. And yet GLAAD is going to tell you that Arkansas lawmakers are the beneficiary of this story, not the pariah. And if you have even the slightest disagreement with GLAAD's agenda, you're exactly the same. You're put in the same box. You are an opponent to be crushed, not a person to be reasoned with. No matter your moral objection, no matter your years of study on the issue, no matter your own personal experience with mutilating your own body and coming to regret it, in that case, you're the one trans person whose voice doesn't count, which should make you question, is it actually the voice that matters to these people? Or is it just what the voice says? None of GLAAD's disputes are about the merits of what was said. GLAAD's dispute is that it was said at all. And that tells us something about the integrity of their case. In all my time trying to figure out what's true about the world, here's a thing I've learned with certainty. People who are secure in their beliefs, religious, political, or otherwise, people who have spent the time thinking through their beliefs to reach that security generally don't get angry when you question them. They actually often like it. They appreciate and enjoy having their views challenged because it's an opportunity to convince you of them. And the inverse is also true. Those with the least confidence in their views will generally meet challenge with hostility. They won't try to persuade you. They'll just try to ban you. They won't consider the counter-argument. They'll just work to deny it any airtime. To them, someone with questions is an enemy, not a curious mind to engage. When you see that, that is not a person looking to convince you. That is a person looking to control you. And for an organization supposedly devoted to reducing hostility and aggression, if GLAAD had their way, they would commit the ultimate hostility and aggression of trying to control your very thoughts themselves. But at least for today, we still have the freedom of our own views. So if you want to convince us, GLAAD, you're going to have to use reason and not the smears that you're supposedly organized to fight. The Tupperware company had this right years ago. Maybe just steal their marketing.
Don't get mad, get glad.
Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel always. Appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below and especially over on Parler, that is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.